All right, everyone. Today's webinar is just 30 minutes, so why don't we go ahead and get started. My name is Rachel Rath. I am the Chief of Staff here at the NEST Coordinating Center, which is part of MDIC, and I'm joined today by Seth Goldenberg from Viva Systems, and we'll be talking about the history of real-world evidence, changes in the landscape, challenges to date, and preparing for the future. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Seth, who is a Vice President at Vault Medical Device and Diagnostics. He's responsible for medical device and diagnostic strategy and product at Viva, focusing on helping customers use Vault to efficiently manage their product life cycle. Seth has nearly 20 years of experience in supporting medical device and diagnostics companies navigate the complex regulations and improve market access for their products. Seth holds a doctorate in pharmacology from the University of Washington and a master's from the School of Biomedical Engineering at Drexel University. So before we get started, I want to share two quick reminders. First is that if you can go ahead and ask any questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom. So I know there's a chat feature, a Q&A, and raising your hand option. So if you could put all questions into the Q&A feature, we will address them at the end of the webinar. Also, as a reminder, the recording from today will be available in the upcoming days on the MDIC website. So to get us started today, I'll be talking about accelerating the use of real-world evidence through NEST. So MDIC received initial funding for the National Evaluation System for Health Technology Coordinating Center in 2016, and NEST is one of 4 core initiatives here at MDIC. But the history of NEST actually began before 2016, and it was through foundational white papers that lay out the need for a national system to help bring medical devices to market faster in the US and to help ensure device safety once devices were on the market. These foundational white papers were developed through planning boards led by the Brookings Institute and Duke Margolis, and culminated in 2016 when MDIC submitted a grant proposal to the FDA for NEST. So the original idea for a national system came from the FDA back in 2012, and that's when they put the planning boards in place. And it was in 2015 that the idea of NEST as a voluntary data network of different institutions and organizations around the country came together. In 2016, the FDA awarded the funding for NEST to MDIC through an initial grant and then through funding through the MDUFA negotiations. In 2017, NEST executive director was named and a multi-stakeholder governing committee was selected. And this is when we were starting to think about building the capacity of NEST and putting those building blocks in place. So we put together the initial strategic and operating plan, and in 2018, started bringing together groups to form the original data network. And this was the data network originally envisioned as that voluntary data network several years before. So what we're currently doing is looking at our test cases, which I'll talk about in a bit, and getting ready to launch NEST 1.0 and have that fully launched and operational by 2022. Now, none of this happens in a vacuum, and it was in 2017 that the FDA released their final guidance for the use of real-world evidence for medical devices. So that's guidance, so it is non-binding recommendations, and it outlines the characteristics of real-world data, regulatory context for using real-world evidence, and examples of where real-world evidence has been used. So for example, expanding indications for use, supplementary data, post-approval device surveillance, as some examples. So as NEST, our mission is to accelerate the development and translation of new and safe health technologies, leveraging real-world evidence and innovative research. And when we're talking about real-world evidence, we're talking about insights that are gleaned from real-world data. So data that's generated in routine course of care. And through that data that have potential to inform and empower patients, accelerate medical device innovation, and improve healthcare outcomes. So as I mentioned, NEST has put in place an initial data network. This network currently consists of 12 network collaborators. These network collaborators represent more than 195 hospitals nearly 4,000 outpatient clinics, and have access to nearly 500 million patient records, although I will note that that doesn't account for duplicates. The majority of these network collaborators are based at healthcare systems, however, not all of them. So for example, HealthCore is based around claims data. But the real-world data sources available within the network include electronic health records, public and private claims, registries, and patient-generated health data. So if we look, for example, at Yale, Yale itself is 5 different hospitals, has access to roughly 2 million patient records, and has several available real-world data sources. So when we think about what it means to use the data network and work collaboratively with these network collaborators, NEST has launched currently 20 different test case projects. These test cases span the total product lifecycle of medical devices and are designed to test the capabilities to answer questions of interest to the medical device ecosystem. So I'll flip through two slides now that will show you the list of the projects, and it will show you sort of the range of different projects underway. So you'll see there are different total product lifecycle areas, different disease areas, and a range of technologies of interest. It's important to note that between 1 to 5 network collaborators are participating on each project. We expect preliminary results over the next couple months. Several of these projects are already submitting preliminary results, and final results will be in within the next year or so. As you look at the data sources listed, you'll see that a number of these projects actually combine different types of real-world data to answer the questions of interest. So here you'll see the range of total product lifecycle alignment, different regulatory pathways that the questions are answering, and different device classes, disease areas, and importantly, data sources. So when we're thinking about real-world data, it is a range of different types of data sources. And where is NEST going over the next couple months? So right now we're in the process of expanding our data network and bringing in new network collaborators with new real-world data sources. So that will expand both the capabilities and the capacity of the network. We're launching frameworks for data quality and methods. And we're launching our roadmap for what active surveillance in NEST will look like. We're also looking forward to looking at the successes and the challenges from these test cases so that we can learn about projects that we'll be doing moving forward. And we're working on launching NEST 1.0 so that by the end of the year, we're in an operational state to take in requests from external groups and facilitating those research projects across the network. I'll now pass it over to Seth, who will talk about data sources for real-world evidence.
Cool, great, thank you, Rachel. Great introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. You can go to the next slide. So before I jump into my presentation, for those who are not familiar with Veeva, Veeva is a cloud-based solutions provider for life science companies, right? Our goal is to build and implement cloud technologies to help life science customers manage their business and enhance our customer value through a robust partner ecosystem. So we're a global company, been around for a while, have done a lot of work in the pharmaceutical space, and are rapidly growing and supporting medical device and diagnostics customers as well. All right, go to the next slide. So as Rachel was discussing, there are a lot of different sources of real-world evidence. The interest and value of real-world evidence and real-world data is growing, but there's remain a lot of challenges. So today I just wanted to cover some of the basics around each of these sources, some of the positives and negatives of each, and also make some comments about looking forward, right, where there are some gaps and potential for improvement in the future. So very briefly, when we're talking about electronic health records, electronic medical records, different claims databases, patient registries, health surveys, but also one of the fastest growing sources of data is actually health-related apps, mobile devices, connected devices, and of course, social media. Go to the next slide. So probably the richest source today, and one that the data, one which the Nest Data Network has great access into, are EMR, EHR, and claims data. So these are systems into which healthcare providers enter routine clinical and laboratory data during their usual practice. These databases can be used under real world or observational studies to assess the benefit and risks of different challenges. There are also some initiatives in Europe, such as the electronic health records for clinical research in Europe, that are looking to create technology platforms that combine hospital data across patients and sites. This data is also based on administrative claims databases, healthcare providers, payers. These are all sources of this EMR or EHR data. Some of the challenges in the U.S. and some that Nest is working on are a lot of these systems are closed. The payers or providers have access to them, but it's challenging without the Nest initiative or others to really gain access to them. You also have to think carefully when looking at these data sets around data quality. Of course, you have to do that with any data, but there is a concern around EMR fatigue and the need for doctors and nurses to enter more and more data, and how quickly are they doing it. So when you're looking at these data sources, you really just have to make sure you're looking at this through that lens and understanding some of those challenges. Another group that can be very valuable is actually pharmacy databases and health insurance databases. These, again, are more billing administration, but they can provide great insights to what consumers of healthcare are using, and it can also be very good for geographic understandings, what consumers are using in what regions. But one thing, when you're looking at these data in general, the output of these is always retrospective. So it's always looking for trends retrospectively, and then using those to develop your hypotheses to go forward. There are some case studies, again, in Europe, small single payer systems. Sweden's system in particular has been used quite a bit for pulling information out and being holistic. But of course, that's unique, right? The US is a much more complex system than Sweden, but there are some good case studies globally that we can try to learn from. Okay, go to the next slide. Great. So another popular group of data are patient registries. So these are organized with a predetermined scientific, clinical, or public health purpose. These patient registries are disease or condition specific in most cases, while you also have product specific ones as well. The disease registries are run through clinical societies. They are great. They're open. You can get access to these quite easily if you're a member of these societies. They also have a lot of stakeholders. So one of the challenges with these disease registries is some of them have 300 plus fields that need to be entered, and you might see gaps in your data set. The product registries are typically run by manufacturers. They're run a lot around safety or post-market surveillance that may have been required by health authorities, and they're also less available. One that's really interesting, or an area that I'm particularly interested in, is an increasing trend for registry-based RCTs, or randomized controlled trials. So this is looking to take the cost savings of registries, low cost, everyone puts their data in, but including some functionality that you would typically see in an RCT. So this is typically you have a mechanism for randomization as part of these registries. There are a couple examples in the literature that started popping up around 2015, 2016, 2017. But when I checked this morning, there's actually 30 registry-based RCTs that are in clinicaltrials.gov today. So this is an increasing trend, and one that is looking to combine the power, large data sets of registries with some of the additional statistical power of randomization and RCT. So this is one that is evolving, but is an important one for the device community. Okay, next slide. So the fastest growing area of data, and just in terms of volume, is patient-generated health data. So these are health data related that's created by family members, by caregivers. People are tracking their health history or treatment history themselves. A lot of biometric data, right? I mean, I'm wearing my Apple Watch as I'm talking right now. I'm generating data, donating it to some of the Apple health initiatives that they're doing, symptoms and lifestyle choices. So it's quite a significant data set, but there is a lot of questions that remain, of course, around data quality, because this is now patient entered, but also, how do we use this data? How do we use these massive data sets to inform healthcare decisions, help inform development of devices or future products? There are also a lot of patients moving away from the device side that they're posting on social media, right? So there are a large number of patient advocacy groups. Patients Like Me is one. That's a big one. They actually have a lot of relationships with industry at this point as well. And this is also being used by large data sets. People are looking at Twitter, showing what are questions that are popping up from particular gender, age groups, location-based preferences, and how can that be used to drive decisions. Right now, these are more at the epidemiological level, less about necessarily driving device decisions, but again, one that is continuing to evolve. Okay, next slide. So when you're looking at real world evidence, right, there's a lot of these common themes that I've mentioned, right? Increasing data sets, increasing amounts of information that are going on today. But what is interesting when you look at the amount of information that's out there, and there's this great study that did this in 2011, it's a couple of years old. But when you look at the amount of medical and clinical knowledge that's out there today, it's doubling extremely fast, right? In 1950, the estimated doubling time was 50 years. Whereas by 2020, every 73 days, the amount of medical, clinical knowledge and data is doubling. So how do we manage that as an industry is a fascinating question. And when you're looking about the amount and value of real world evidence, is clear. The access to the data, again, Rachel gave a great background on how NEST is trying to open that up to industry and as well as regulators and patients through their data network and some of the other initiatives. But you're also looking at all these sources in a disconnected way. So if you can click once. There's, looking at how to, pull all this information in. I have one build on the slide, just click for me, that'd be great. And then, thank you. So when you're looking at how to pull all this information in, right? So each one of these data sources have challenges, on their own, right? Data quality always needs to be looked at. You have multiple registries, some of them are looking at multiple different fields, but they're not typically looked at together in one space. You have your EMR and EHR from multiple different agencies. But when you're looking at these, it's important to look at trends across multiple ones and pull that information together in a way where you can really utilize these tools. Some of the other trends or challenges, of course, while EMR, EHR data, registry data is typically very structured, clearly defined fields, looking for specific outcomes. Patient-generated data, social media data is very unstructured. So also need to take into consideration around how will we use new tools, novel tools that can capture and analyze and identify trends in unstructured data as well as structured data. Historically, in the medical device sector, the pharmaceutical sector, life sciences in general, it's always structured data, but we're also facing challenges with how do we leverage this unstructured data today and what value does that have to the industry. Okay, click next slide. So hopefully this was, the purpose of this webinar was give a background of where we are today, an overview of some of the common sources of real world evidence, but also we're going to be continuing this discussion next week at the MedTech Conference. For those who are attending or colleagues are attending, we'll be pulling together a great panel. Owen Ferris from the FDA, who's the director of the Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis and was intimately involved in the generation of FDA guidance on real world evidence. Manish Baraha from Siemens, Diane from GE Healthcare, and then Rachel and myself will be continuing this conversation from where we are today, but also looking to the future. How can we continue to evolve the use of real-world data and real-world evidence in our regulatory decisions, and work to make sure that all this data can be put to good use and promote the public health and device innovation. So with that, I thank everyone for their time, and Rachel, happy to turn it back to you for questions.
Thank you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A feature on the Zoom call now. We don't have any questions submitted so far. So folks can either, maybe folks will bring them to the MedTech panel and we'll continue the conversation there.
No, I think that's great, Rachel. I appreciate your time, and it was great to present this with MDIC.
Thank you so much, Seth, and everyone for joining today.